This assignment, I decided to do the wage gap in men and women's sports. This is an For this assignment, I decided to do my PowerPoint on the wage gap in men and women's sports. This is a issue that has been talked about a lot recently, and I figured it was fitting for this assignment. So there are a couple important events that came about that sort of started this movement. Obviously, men's sports as a whole has been around longer than women's sports, going all the way back to gladiator days. But there have been some more recent movements now, especially with the implementation of more women's sports and trying to grow that brand of people trying to fight for equal compensation. So in 2014, the men's soccer team in the U.S. Received $8 million as a team, despite not even getting past the first round of the World Cup. Whereas the women's team, they actually won the World Cup. They only received $2 million as a team. So this was sort of an outcry that was caused by the women's soccer team. A lot of them spoke out. A number of them are very strong advocates for this today. The team filed a lawsuit over the revenue disparities, and the men consistently make more money than their female counterparts. Typically, that has to do with the fact that they generate more revenue, so it's dispersed among their athletes. So looking at a specific example of some of the disparities that we see in men and women's sports, this one's for the NBA. Obviously, you have to look at the financials to then look at the problem. So the average NBA salary is about $11 million for this past year. An average NBA player that makes about $22 million, which is the average between 1991 to 2022. Jaylen Brown is currently making the most in the NBA with about $60 million, $800,000. That is his contract. He recently signed that, which was a record-breaking contract for the NBA. The NBA as a whole is a $10 billion industry, and they split 50% of their revenue with the players' salaries. So the NBA does a pretty good job with their marketing. They attracted a season average of about 1.59 million TV viewers over the 2022 to 2023 NBA seasons. It's actually the lowest since 2018, besides obviously the 2020 season, which was when COVID happened. Viewership was down across all sports, but they are seeing a little bit of a decrease right now in their viewership, but they're still obviously receiving pretty good numbers with 1.59 million TV viewers, but they're definitely going to want to hope to get that average back to what it was before the pandemic. The 2020 to 2021 NBA season received about $46.41 million through ticket sales, and then overall they are about $1.46 billion valued in sponsorship revenue. So they work with a lot of other companies that you'll see often presented on jersey patches or on court things like that. Working with these companies with sponsorships, they get about 1.46 billion through that. So on the other side of the coin, there's the WNBA, and their numbers aren't quite the same or nearly close actually to what the NBA players are making. Average salary is only $147,000 for a WNBA player, which comparatively is obviously very, very drastically less than what the men are making. Average career earnings only $517,107 for these women, whereas men are obviously in the, I believe it was $11 million. The current highest player is actually a tie between three players: Arike Ogunbowale, Kalia Cooper, and then Jewell Loyd, all tied at $241,000. So we go from a $60 million contract handed out to the highest contract for the men, whereas the women is just in the 100,000s. So certainly a large gap between that. It's only a $60 million industry comparatively to the NBA, which is quite a bit more. And then they split 80% of their earnings with their players' salaries. So like the men was 50%, they are 80%. So they actually give more money than they are giving out, receiving to their players than what the NBA does. So the WNBA viewership and marketing is different than the men's, obviously. They only attracted about an average of 505,000 TV viewers. However, the good news on their side is that this is the highest viewership that they've seen since 2018. So whereas the men are going down in their viewership numbers, the women are going up, but they still have a very long road to climb before they're able to get nearly on the same level as what the men are receiving. Overall, they only about $162.9 million in sponsorship revenue. So, like I mentioned before, with it being in the billions for the males, only in the millions for the females, but they are trying to continue to grow this brand the best that they can with these sponsorship opportunities, and they are seeing an increase, whereas the NBA is actually seeing a decrease. So tennis is one of the sports that's sort of an individual sport that we can compare men and women. So one of the cool things that tennis does, and they've implemented for a while now, is that both men and women at some sort of tournaments will receive equal prize money. And that's the Grand Slams, and the Grand Slams are four of the biggest tennis tournaments that they have. However, there are still some tournaments that a lot of these athletes compete in that don't offer equal prize money. Men typically receive more than that. And because of this, men still make over 75% more than their female players from prize money in these other tournaments. The 2023 Dubai Championships, the men's prize fund was $3 million, whereas the women's was considerably less than that. This is one of the biggest instances of somebody having a pretty large disparity between the prize money given out to the winners. The average men's tennis player makes about $335,000 every year. Novak Djokovic, he makes the most in all of tennis at $38.4 million. But some of that comes from off-court money with sponsorships at $25 million. He actually makes more money off-court than he does on-court. Then in 2023, 5 of the top 10 earnings among tennis players are men, the top 2 being men. But obviously, with 5 out of 10, that means that 5 of them were also women. It's just certainly notable the fact that the top 2 are men. The ATP, which is the Association of Tennis Professionals, had a revenue of $176.8 million in 2021, so a relatively high value market. So I mentioned that Dubai Championship where the man received a $3 million payday. Women's prize money was just $780,000, so a very large discrepancy there. So Iga Swiatek makes the most in women's tennis with $22.4 million. She is the third overall highest paid tennis player throughout the entire world. She makes $8.4 million on court and $14 million off court. Much like Djokovic, she makes more money off court than she does on court. Women's tennis made up the other 5 of the top 10 highest paid players in tennis, and the Women's Tennis Association, which made about $87.8 million in revenue in 2021. Can't really talk about this issue, especially talking about men and women's tennis, without talking about Venus and Serena Williams, 2 of the most iconic tennis players, regardless of gender, in the entire sport. Serena Williams is one of the most recognized athletes in the entire world. Serena has made about $94 million in prize money in her career. Venus made about $42 million in prize money for her career. They are 2 of the highest in WTA, which is the Women's Tennis Association, in history in terms of their career innings. Both of them are very strong advocates for equality in sports. Venus Williams was once quoted saying, "Tennis has ups and downs. Equity should never have ups and downs." Women's are also very strong contributors to that equal purse being established in the Grand Slams that I talked about earlier. So they were very important with meetings, closed-door meetings with some of the higher-ups trying to get this incorporated in their tournaments. Venus is partnered with Credit Karma to go beyond tennis to fight for equity in the more common workplaces. She was quoted saying, "Money is a thing, money is a real thing, but the topic is about equality and opportunity. And with money comes opportunity and empowerment. And historically, women have not had these opportunities. When we talk about minorities, the gaps go wider. Outside the United States, the gap goes wide open. So this is an issue facing women all over the world." So these 2, which are American tennis players, recognize that not only is this a problem here in America, It's also something that is even wider outside of America, and it's something they're continuing to fight for equality in the sports world. So the NIL implementation, which is name, image, and likeness, was recently implemented by college programs all throughout the country, and it's a way to make players here in college athletics make a little bit of money off of their name. So you can make a T-shirt that has your name on it. Somebody buys that, you receive some compensation, whereas before you were not able to. So this has certainly changed some of the things and made a little bit of equality in the sports world for men and women. So $1.14 billion was said to be put into NIL in the 21 to 22 collegiate season. The average NIL deal in 2021 to 2022 was about $1,500 per player. The football average was the highest at $3,390, whereas women's athletics was second with $1,084. Women's gymnastics overall was $7,054. So they had actually the highest, and overall most money is being poured into football, but there is one specific person in the gymnastics world that has generated quite a bit of money through a name, image, and likeness, and has caused that rate to go very high. So a little bit more in-depth breakdown of the NIL. The NCAA men's sports received about 62.7% of total compensation, where women only received about 37.3%. That does have to do with some of the sports. Men's football is the highest earning, like I said before, and the fact that they receive the most money through this. They have a lot of players, and so some of the women's sports, they don't have a sport that's as dominant like that. A lot of their sports are going to be a little bit smaller roster sizes as well, so less money is being poured into it. So it's more notable the fact that some of these sports are receiving more on average money rather than actual percentages of compensation, just because of the fact that roster sizes and the amount of men and women's athletes are different throughout the NCAA. However, excluding football, which I mentioned earlier, results change. Women receive 52.8%, men only receive 47.2%. So obviously, as you can see, football is the biggest recipient of NIL money. The big five sports in NIL earnings are football at 49.9%, nearly 50% there. Men's basketball 17%, and then the rest are women's sports, with women's basketball being 15.7%, women's volleyball at 2.3%, and then softball at 2.1%. So you might be wondering, gymnastics had that high average. Why are they not on there? Gymnastics roster sizes are typically a little bit smaller, and so there's going to be less people to be giving money for. So the compensation is going to be a little bit different. So I mentioned earlier how there was one person in the gymnastics world who received kind of the highest amount and made that average go up quite a bit. That would be Olivia Dunn, pictured to the left there. She's the highest paid collegiate female athlete. She's third overall in terms of all NIL compensation. She's got deals that equate to about $3.4 million. She's made $500,000 off of one social media post. That was kind of one of her biggest NIL deals that she's signed. She signed with companies such as ESPN, Forever 21, Linktree, historic deal with Leaf Trading Cards. She has a line of yoga pants that has some commercials on YouTube TV. She's signed with a number of companies, and she's made quite a bit of money off of her name and image and likeness. Angel Reese, she's a basketball player at the University of LSU. She had a multi-year partnership with Reebok, making her one of the first major NIL signings by Shaquille O'Neal since taking over. Her and Shaquille O'Neal have a pretty good relationship. He actually was at her senior day recently. She works with them for her name, image, and likeness to try to give Reebok more of a brand, and then she also receives compensation through that. She also works with Coach, SI Swimsuit, Amazon, and then Raising Cane's. And then the Cavender twins, both Haley and Hannah, made about $2 million together since NIL was implemented. Some of their notable brands include Champ Sports, Life Wallet, Core Hydration, and Boost Mobile. So these two twins that played basketball at Miami received quite a bit of money through their name, image, and likeness. So some of the encouraging signs. So all the women's sports that I checked out are seeing some record-breaking years, where the men's are starting to see some numbers go down. So that's certainly something that is encouraging. We're starting to see that gap close a little bit between men and women's sports. Iowa women's basketball team had a scrimmage over the fall that was hosted at the football stadium. They had 55,000 people in attendance, set the record for the most attended women's college basketball game. So the brand is starting to grow even more. People are getting more and more interested in women's sports. The issue is also becoming more discussed with professionals, athletes, reporters, things of that nature. They're starting to talk about this issue a little bit more, putting it at the forefront of people's minds. There's a lot being done to try and help this and try to fight for equality in the sports world. And prize money for tennis is also equal, so that's definitely one sign that we have in some of the sports and some of the tournaments that they do that is very encouraging, with the fact that these women are going to receive the same amount of money if they win the same tournament that the men do. Definitely an encouraging sign of things to come. And we're continuing to fight to this day for better wage gap.